We'll take a minute for everyone to get in, but in the meantime, I want to welcome all of our attendees tonight for Metro's Working Smarter, Not Harder educational series. And we want to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors. Just as a reminder, ask everybody to remain on mute when not speaking, and we can have questions entered in the chat box, which are on the bottom, and will be open for discussion after the presentation. And a little note about some upcoming events. On March 10th, we have our next scheduled seminar presented by Wet Edge Technologies on pool finishes. March 30th, we'll have a presentation on cybersecurity. And on April 13th, a presentation on chlorine reduction using mineral agents. And we already have a save the date for August 10th, our annual golf outing. We hope everyone can attend these events. And now we are very pleased to present Rebecca Thompson, CPO and Distribution Channel Manager from Earth Science Labs, who will be making a presentation on winter water chemistry. Rebecca, leave it to you.
Oh, hello, everyone. Glad you could join us. Looks like we have quite a few people that have joined, and I know there were quite a few registrants for this. Go ahead and okay, can you all see my screen now, Phil?
Okay. I see it. Winter water care.
Okay, there we go. Tonight I'm going to go over winter water care. And as I was saying earlier before you all joined, I did learn a few things while writing this over the last couple weeks. So it's not sorry. It's not that I know everything, because I still do learn, which is absolutely wonderful. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And then we'll also have some time at the end for questions and answers. Tonight, we're going to be looking at closing the pool. This is the first step in taking care of the pool water while the pool is closed. We'll look at what changes during the winter and some of the things we can control, and things to look at before opening the pool, and then opening a clean, clear pool for your customers, and having your customers open up a clean, clear pool. The things we need to think about when closing the pool is the water temperature, water balance, and chemicals. I'm going to start with water temperature. The water temperature is important when closing the pool for a couple different reasons. If the water is 60 degrees or below, then microorganisms and algae can't grow in that water. They become dormant for the winter season. So the colder the water is when we close the pool, the better chance that you have and your customer has for opening up a crystal clear pool. There is no pool fairy. If you close a dirty pool, you're pretty much guaranteed to open a dirty pool. So the colder the water, the less likely you are for organisms to grow once you put that dark cover on. That dark cover that you put on can hold in the heat, and so the water temperature will rise when the sun hits the cover. Air temperature falls below 30 degrees, you need to make sure that your equipment is winterized. I've had people say, well, the water is still circulating because my pump is running. Well, those slides and fountains aren't circulating. So you have the opportunity for the equipment to freeze and bust, and nobody will be happy when that happens and have to replace equipment. So there's a happy medium here. You want the water to be below 60 degrees and the air temp to be above 30. We know that a lot of our customers start looking at closing, they open Memorial Day, they close Labor Day. But if we can talk them into staying open until that water temperature drops, it's much better for the pool water and opening a clear pool in the spring. We're going to start out looking at now water balance. Standard water balance during the season, total alkalinity. When I started in the pool industry 20 years ago, total alkalinity was 80 to 120. Over the years, things have changed. Some chemical manufacturers push for 100 to 150. And then there's the mineral companies that push for 50 to 90 parts per million. I've contacted a couple friends of mine that work for liner manufacturers, and they told me that the liner manufacturers are more concerned about the pH, and whatever holds that pH in place is, what they want to see, because they don't want that pH bouncing around. I go back all the time to the 80 to 120 because that's where I started at years ago. The pH of the water should be between 7.2 and 7.6 or 7.8. One of the reasons for this is the pH of your eyes is 7.4. So with the pH of the water being between 7.2 and 7.6, it cuts down on that burning and stinging and eye irritation that customers complain about, because it is a real thing. And then the calcium hardness between 180 and 200 parts per million. As I said, this is standard water balance during the season, but we're going to discuss water balance at closing, which isn't always standard. This is the Langmuir saturation index. It takes a lot of things into consideration when looking at the pool chemistry. One of the main things that it does take into consideration is water temp. And if you have a computer generated water lab, your lab typically does figure out the LSI, or the Langmuir saturation index, for you. It can be done by hand. I do it quite frequently, but as long as you've got a computer or a calculator, it doesn't take any time at all. The reason that I like to look at the saturation index is you want to look at the water temperature, and the temperature index, the pH you use, is the pH of your pool. The temperature index is done, if Fahrenheit. If your temperature of your pool is 84, which I love during the summer, then your temperature index is 0.7. So you would use the pH, whatever your pH is of your pool, plus the temperature index. Your calcium index, also, they just don't use calcium hardness. Your calcium index is used based on what your calcium reading is when you are closing that pool. So if it's 150, then that would be 1.8. And then you use the total alkalinity index. So if your total alkalinity is, we're going to go with 100 because that's between the 80 and 120, it would be 2.0. Anything below -2 is considered corrosive. Anything above 0.2 is scaling. So we want to make sure that that water is not corrosive or scaling during the winter. Now here's an example of what would be acceptable during the season. pH of 7.4, water temperature of 84, calcium hardness of 200, and alkalinity of 90. So the saturation index, you've got the 7.4, you've got the 0.7 for the temperature, you've got the 1.9 for the calcium hardness, the 2 for the total alkalinity, and then you subtract 12.1 to get your Langmuir saturation index. So the saturation index on this pool would be -0.1, which is within the acceptable range. This would be an excellent pool and an excellent way to run that pool during the season because you're not scaling and you're not corrosive. But let's take a look at what happens when we close that same pool. If you close at 60, your water temperature, it goes in there at a 0.4. Everything else is the exact same. So this leaves this pool corrosive. So if you've got it sitting like this, then during the season or during the winter season, this pool is going to be corrosive. You drop the temperature even more, it becomes even more corrosive. What is a good thing to look at using the LSI, the Langmuir Saturation Index, is what's your water temperature going to be during the winter season? 60 is probably pretty high. So what I would recommend is figuring, your water temp. Once it gets to freezing, you really don't have to worry about it, but you might look at your water temp being between 35 and 38 degrees and do your pH and your alkalinity to where that water will not be corrosive or scaling over the winter. If you leave it to where it is scaling or corrosive, you're going to end up with calcium deposits on your liner, on your gunite pools, tile lines. And we all know that those are difficult to take off. But the other issue is increasing your acidity of the water is not going to help remove that. It's just the opposite. So what you need to do is get your LSI in balance, and that scaling and corrosiveness can fall back into consistency. You need, though, to make sure that you keep the pool saturation index where it needs to be, especially as you're closing. Chemicals. It's recommended to shock your pools with chlorine. I would not recommend shocking your pool any less than 4 days prior to closing, because you want to make sure that those chemicals are moving throughout the water. Chemicals only kill what they touch. And once that water starts circulating, your chlorine isn't going to be moving. So if you're putting your chlorine in and then closing your pool, that chlorine is not moving throughout the pool. So it's really not doing anything. It's a waste of chlorine. It's a waste of your money and a waste of your customers' money, because once that pool stops moving, that chlorine stops moving and it stops killing. Non-chlorine shock. It's safer for vinyl liners, and it can be used within 24 hours of closing, because if it does settle, it's a non-chlorine shock, so you're not going to bleach out your liner. Algaecides for preventative should be used no less than 24 hours prior to closing. Again, chemicals only kill what they touch. So if this algaecide is not moving, then it's not able to kill. Now, saying this, that's unless you're using an algaecide which is self-dispersing or does continue to move once the water slows or stops. Stain and scale, again, as a preventative, 24 hours prior to closing. That way the water has a chance to turn over, and you're moving that around the entire pool. Enzymes, as a preventative, they do not do well in severe heat or severe cold, but these enzymes can help if you put them in before closing, and the chlorine shock or the non-chlorine shock does break down microorganisms. These enzymes will be there to consume those. And if the water does heat up during, if we have an Indian summer and we get, a nice warm spell after that pool is closed, then it does help take care of anything that starts growing in the pool. Our winters have also been much milder. I know, saying that, and you guys are all looking outside at the snow that you have on the ground, and I'm supposed to be at -8 on Sunday morning. But truthfully, our winters have been a little bit milder than normal. So closing the pool is very important, because we want to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can if we do have a nice day and that water starts to heat up. What changes during the winter? Well, temperatures drop, chemistry changes. The pH and alkalinity tend to drop as the water temperature drops. Also, you see a tendency for calcium to fall out of consistency. So that's why, as I discussed, setting your pool closing around what you expect the water temperature to be when you're closing when the pool is closed. More damage occurs to the pool during the winter, primarily in the form of etching and scaling. The water will find equilibrium. The water takes what it needs to find the equilibrium. And I'm sorry, guys, this is kind of gross, but the way I explain it is, if you see a pregnant woman, the fetus, the baby, takes what it needs and depletes the iron, the vitamins, the calcium, and all out of the mother. Well, the water does the same thing. It takes what it needs from the equipment, from the liner, from the gunite pools, to find that equilibrium. So being proactive in your closing of the water and looking at your pH and alkalinity and your calcium while closing will help that water have equilibrium during the winter. What to do? Close the pool balanced. Think about the LSI. We all know our water temperature when that pool is closed is not going to stay at 60 degrees. Use a cover pump or something to keep the water off of the cover during the winter months as much as possible. I say that, but right now I have snow standing on my cover. But the more that there is stuff on top of that cover, the more there is a likelihood that that is going to go into the pool. And the problem with that is when that water starts heating up, you're going to have any kind of microorganisms that were sitting on that cover now in the pool water. We want to keep the pool cover as clear as possible. If you have a mesh cover in the keep those leaves off of the mesh cover. After that pool is closed, people close early to keep the leaves off. Well, or keep the leaves out of the water. If those leaves are sitting on top of that cover, they are breaking down, and that is going into the pool and causing issues with growth of bacteria and microorganisms in there as well. Before opening the pool, we want to make sure again that we keep the cover pumped off and free of debris. And I've had people tell me, oh, I add liquid chlorine during the winter. Well, that's good for that one spot where you pour that chemical in, because that liquid chlorine is not going to go anywhere except right where you've poured it in. It does not move around the pool. Your water in your pool is not moving. So there is no need to add any chemicals to the pool unless they are self-dispersing, as they'll just sit in that one spot. Chemicals only kill what they touch, so that one spot of your pool will be nice and clean. When it comes time for opening, I definitely encourage opening the pool as the water hits 60 degrees. Reason is, again, things will start growing. And so we need to look at the water temperature more so than the air temperature and what holiday it happens to fall on. Get that cover pumped off, set up the equipment, and take the cover off, start running the pump and your equipment. Encourage your customers to run the filter for a minimum of 24 hours prior to having their water tested. The reason is turnover ratio. If they start it up and an hour later come in and have you test the water, you're testing just that water. It could not, it might be water that hasn't even run through the system yet. It's just sitting there in the same spot that it was when they opened the pool. So encourage your customers to run that pump and filter system for a good 24 hours prior to bringing the water in to test it. That way you know what you're looking at. Once you have that water, the pool water running for 24 hours, everything is moved around in the water. Go ahead and balance the water again with the LSI, because your water temperature is not going to be 84 right now. Hopefully your customer has opened up their pool, or you've opened up your service pools at that 60-degree mark, so nothing has grown in it, and your pool is just as clear as it was when you closed it. Because remember, there is no pool fairy. I've been looking for him for 20 years. And then, make sure that everything is balanced. The first water test of the season, you want to check all the parameters. You want to check, I know dealers who, well, I don't check calcium hardness because it doesn't change. Well, over the winter, it will change. There is going to be water that gets into the pool from, the snow that's on top of those covers and all. And then there is also going to be fill water when you fill the pool up at opening. I bring in city water because I have a well, and I never know what the parameters of that water is that I bring in. So you always want to check everything. You want to check the calcium. You want to check the pH, the alkalinity, the total dissolved solids. Once those total dissolved solids reach a point where your chemicals start or stop breaking down, they're not able to do their job. With the TDS too high, your chlorine is not going to be moving around in the water as well, and it will make it more difficult to clear that pool up. You can see cloudy water because of your TDS being too high. And also check your cyanuric acid. It is difficult to get a correct cyanuric acid reading until that water warms up, but you want to know the initial starting. I never recommend adding cyanuric acid until the water temperature gets a little higher. We're not going to have the hot days, so your chlorine isn't going to dissipate anyway. And your water balance will change as the water temperature goes up. In hot water, in your spas, you'll notice that the pH has a tendency to go higher, brought on by the hot water as well as the aeration. Same thing happens in pool water. That water's been sitting still, now it's moving, and the temperature, hopefully, is going up because nobody likes to swim in cold water. As I said, most of your computer programs do the LSI for you. The problem is you have to be willing to change your water temperature. You can go into those computers and set the temperature of the water before you do the water test, because knowing the temperature of the water is going to help you know where to balance things out. Where do you need your pH if your water temperature is at 60? Is going to be, it can be affected and be different than where you need it when the water temperature is 84. Because if the water is not balanced, it can cause scaling and corrosion to the pool. I want to open up for questions. I know I went over a lot of things, and I know also that, questions will lead to more discussion. So okay, you use a sump pump to mix chemicals for 10 minutes. Well, that's good for that 10 minutes. But once you stop using that pump, that water is just going to stand still. It is important. You don't want to put chemicals in to just let them sit. But as long as you're moving them for that 10 minutes, that is going to help. Trash pump to lower the water. When we close the pool, we turn around after, lower the water and recirculate chemicals. Very, very good, because you do want to make sure that those chemicals do get circulated. But like I said, you really want it to circulate for 24 hours for that turnover ratio, so that all of that water has been moved around in there, and it's not just focusing on that one area. So it's going to matter how long you do keep that trash pump running. What about liquid chlorine in the off season? Well, you've got liquid chlorine, which has a pH of 13 to 14, depending on where it's manufactured. And you're putting that in. Again, that's just going to sit there. I know, you can walk it around the edges of the pool. If you have an auto cover, that means you have to open up the entire cover. But again, that product is not moving once that water stops. And it's not really useful if it's just killing in that one area. That's something that we all know in our heads, that, if the chemicals can't move, they can't touch things. And if they can't touch things, they can't kill. There are more questions? Controversy?
Well, typically, most of us, can you hear me?
Yes.
Typically, most of us close a lot of pools, so it becomes challenging to figure out the best way to recirculate water without going a few days in advance. So if you're closing a few hundred or 1,000 pools in the fall, there really needs to be something in progress, or as you're closing. I had made the comment, we lower the pools, we spin our pumps, they pump 350 gallons a minute. If they're going for 10 minutes as we're completing, blowing out the rest of the equipment and getting cleaned up, even if we just leave one flap off. And, most of the pools in the Northeast, I would say predominantly a lot of them have safety covers. So it's a really easy thing to do, to sort of leave a couple springs off. The water just keeps circulating while everything else is finished up. And then we, clean up our pump. That's the last thing, and go on our way. So we try and recirculate. But it is tough. As some people that do weekly maintenance, it's a great idea if that's working smarter, that you're going to do a maintenance a week before the pool's closing. It's a great time to add chemicals and get that LSI right. So certainly everyone, is aware of what you're saying and makes a whole lot of sense. So certainly do appreciate that. And getting proactive for the winter is outstanding.
If you're doing the service, like you said, the week before is the best time to do it. Get everything taken care of, add your chemicals the week before, so that way they've got time to circulate. And like I said, if you're closing at 60 or below, you're not going to have anything growing in there anyway. And that's one of the things with adding. There's a question here about sanitation during the winter. If the water is frozen, and I know up there, because it does here in Indiana, the top of the pool freezes, nobody's going to be getting into it. Do you sanitize your bathtub water before you get into it? No. So it doesn't, the reason we sanitize the pool during the summer is so that the swimmers don't end up with issues. The swimmers don't get sick. Just keeping the water circulated is going to keep it from getting stagnant during the summer. And stagnant water is where, we get mosquitoes and things like that. But we use the chemicals to sanitize so that it's safe for the swimmers. As long as you wait and close at a colder temperature, you don't really need to have that water sanitized during the winter season, especially not if you have a safety cover on it. Nobody's going to be getting into it.
We have a couple more questions.
Yeah, I was trying to read.
Chat.
I know during the winter time, when it's time to open the pool, I sometimes find crystals all over the pool. Is there anything I can do to prevent this from happening? Balancing the water, looking at what the temperature is going to be during the winter. Using the LSI when you close it, especially. I test my water at home, and I don't have a computer, so I don't look at the LSI during the season. But during the winter, when you close, you need to, because your water temperature is going to change. Nobody's going to have their water circulating all winter long, and nobody's going to have their heater running when they're not in there all winter long. But so try to look at the Langmuir saturation index and adjust your water to where it needs to be based on the temperature, and that will help cut down on that crystallizing that you're getting. What to do after is to don't just acid wash it. Get everything within balance, and then that will help all of that fall back into consistency. Again, the best thing is, balancing the water and brushing, because those crystals a lot of the times are not attached. They're just stuck to the walls. And if you brush them, then they're going to come off and get back out into the water circulating. Yes, I would. Okay, the question is, should we use 32 degrees as our worst case scenario for our winters for the LSI circulation in the fall? That's a very good number to use because, once that water freezes, nothing's going to happen anyway. But 32 to 38 depending on where you are and the ground temperature. My pool it's an in-ground pool, but it's been built up. The ground around it is built up. So it does get colder because it's not deep down in the ground, even though I have a diving end because it's kind of on a hill. So my water temperature, I know, gets down to 32 degrees. But I have seen some that are, really blocked, and those will stay up around the 35 degrees. And in warmer areas, south of here, which we don't typically have that issue. What if the pH is what if the pH is 8? If the pH is 8, you definitely want to lower that because you will be corrosive, and you will end up with issues in the water over the winter, and more issues when you open. A pH of 8 is not good for your equipment. It's not good for your liner during the season, before the season, after the season. So it's very hard. It's very hard to balance the water when you're a service guy and you've got multiple pools to do. You don't have time to go back to every single pool for a week to make sure that everything's ready to close it. When you're going to close the week before, if you're servicing, then lower or get everything in range based on where the LSI would be. And then the next week when you go to close, you can balance it again based on where it should be at closing. Do you typically have a sheet to take with you when you close a pool? Write on that sheet where that water should be at closing based on your temperature, based on your testing the week before. If you're not servicing that pool, you're just going to have to get it as close as you possibly can. But you don't want to close your pool with the pH of 8. Would you want us to adjust the calcium or the alkalinity to balance out the LSI at cold temperatures? I would adjust the alkalinity. Calcium, you really can't lower it. So the only thing you can do is raise it. And then you have issues with too much calcium in the pool in the summer when you're running it. So you're better off to adjust the alkalinity to bring it back into balance. If it is essentially of waste to add liquid shock, can you recommend any chemicals that would be beneficial to add during the winter visit? There is a copper-based algaecide on the market that is self-dispersing, and it will continue to move until the water freezes. Once the water starts to thaw, it'll start moving again, and that is based on the way that the molecule is chelated and sequestered, so it's not wrapped up, so it will move throughout the water. And that would be the product that I could recommend, because it does move in the water and not just sit there. The molecule bounces off of itself in the water, so it's constantly moving even after the system shut down and the water's not moving. Once the water freezes, though, there's nothing to add. The copper-based algaecide is called Algae Shield, and it's available through distribution. Any other questions? If you haven't typed one in, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, because I know there's a couple people that are on phones. It might be easier to do that. I hear about borates for the winter, but I'm not up on this. Do you have experience with this? I've never looked at borates for winterizing. Borates are, I love borates in the pool. I think they help. I think they help lock in your water chemistry. I have borates in my pool. And again, they wouldn't be moving, but they would help maintain your water balance once you get it set. With the borates in the pool, that does help lock in the pH. Oh, yes. Any other questions? I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Now, the only issue is I can't see. Okay, now I have the chat up. Does anyone have any more questions? Yeah.
Just, if you don't have a computer, there are a lot of companies that make, Taylor's one, for instance, that makes it kind of a cool little wheel. And you can just enter in the temperature and the calcium levels, and it will give you LSI. So it's kind of a neat little tool if you are somewhere and you want to be able to figure that out. I mean, there are certainly apps and that sort of thing, but that little wheel has been around forever and it's kind of cool.
Yes. And like I said, even if everybody has a phone, everybody has a calculator on their phone. Not everybody has the saturation index in front of them though. So that Taylor wheel would be excellent. It would help. Arenda's app does work well on figuring it out, as long as you have that app on your phone. Any other questions? I did put my contact information up here. Please feel free to give me an email. Sorry, I didn't put my phone number on there. I don't mind giving it out. If anybody would like it, because, I do take phone calls. I tell people all the time, I take a phone call unless I'm in with a dealer on the other phone or in a meeting, because I know I had a gentleman that I worked with for 13 years over the phone before I ever met him. And all we did was phone chats. But, as I said, I did learn a few things while looking at this. So thank you for asking me to do this, Phil. It did help me a little.
Sure. We really appreciate you doing this. I think everybody learned a lot tonight. We are certainly appreciative of all our attendees. And I know if you type in your phone number on the chat screen, people can take note of that right now. If you have your business phone number to chat, type right into chat.
Okay, I sure will.
And Earth Science Labs also has a very impressive website, so we encourage people to go to the website for more information.
I've had exposure to the Scale Tech products, and in certain incidents, those do work well. But again, they want you to make sure that the water is balanced. Any other questions?
All right. Rebecca, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Great job.
Thank you for asking me.
We're looking forward to next month's seminar, March 10th. And normally in the past, we'd say have a safe trip home, but you're home already. So be safe and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, everyone.